It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello, and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And we are talking about Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki today.
Indeed we are.
Alexis has asked me to go first with the plot summary. I actually don't want to give away much because I think part of the joy of this book is encountering each of the developments as they come.
All right. Would you like me to give the plot summary after all?
No, I was just going to give the plot summary in a way that didn't give away much.
Oh, okay.
The book's protagonist is Katrina, who is a trans girl.
One of the book's three protagonists.
The first character who we encounter in the book is Katrina. No, you're clearly not even going to let me do the plot summary, so perhaps you should go ahead.
Do the plot summary.
Katrina, a trans girl from an abusive family who is a violinist who makes YouTube videos covering game and anime music and is also a survival sex worker, escapes from her family to become homeless, essentially, but is taken in by a older lady violin teacher who is notorious for creating brilliant but troubled and eventually doomed students. This woman accepts Katrina as her teacher, and the rest of the book is a long negotiation about whether Katrina will join those other students on their path to damnation. That is, I think, it's a completely useless summary of the book. That's a
completely useless summary of the book. That's also interesting because you picked the plot thread that's basically the one that's completely left off the book cover.
Yeah. I'm just trying not to give, as I said, anything.
No,
any of the interesting parts away.
I feel like you have to give some of the interesting parts away. I feel like the book does not make sense unless you understand that.
Semi-spoiler zone. Semi-spoiler zone.
That Katrina's mentor has sold her soul to the devil and will only get it back, and her soul and her ability to play music to the devil, and will only get these back if she sells the souls of 7 other brilliant violinists to hell. And meanwhile, Shizuka, the mentor, is trying to balance this with her affection for this last student and her growing romance on donut shop owner / interstellar space captain.
Don't tell them that
refugee.
she's interstellar space captain.
It is on the front flap of the book cover.
It shouldn't be. It is. I have the audiobook.
This book is sold. This book was pitched to audience, I believe, on the cover as Good Omens meets The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. The former of which I have a great deal of affection for, and the latter of which I loathe. So.
Oh, and there we go. So it's already contentious, as you can tell.
No, it's I think that this book is extremely charming and not very good, and has a lot of things that really irritated me.
I think this book is great. So that'll be fun. Do you think that
this book is great, or did you really enjoy this book?
Well, we'll get into that when we get into that. Let me try a third plot summary. This book is an extended love letter to the Asian suburbs of LA, and incidentally to music and to food.
Yes.
And to various other sensual
and video games
pleasures. Video games feature. And everything else is essentially set dressing for that. Are there lesbians in this book?
People's identities aren't particularly well documented, but there is a romance between 2 people who you can consider women.
Yes. 2 female presenting and identifying people. 2 elder, I should mention. This is the oldest lesbian couple we have had in this book, as the younger member of the couple is in her 80s.
Yes, though they both look like, extremely beautiful, aged well women in their 40s. So
Well, for part of the time they do.
Yes, okay, except you're at the end.
And are there wizards?
I would argue that there's at least a demon.
Yes, and I would say that Shizuka acts as a wizard on his behalf for most of the book.
Yes.
And the conflict here is essentially sort of intra wizard versus lesbian. It's another one of those books where the lesbian and the wizard are the wizard. There are two wolves inside you, and one is a wizard and one is a lesbian, and they're fighting
Yes.
over your destiny as a violin teacher of the damned. Right. So why should you read this book? Alexis, can you... I was wondering if you could guess which of my beloved authors this book reminded me intensely of throughout the entire thing.
No, I have no idea.
If you like the work of one Daniel Manus Pinkwater, the only of the old masters of my childhood who remains unblemished in my estimation as I've grown up, you may like this book.
That's fair. That is fair. This book manages to... Bruce Coville, too.
And Louis Sachar.
Like, this book definitely manages to capture the feeling of a certain kind of, like, childhood science fiction writer.
Yes. This I would say that if you want to locate a school of American magical realism, that is what Pinkwater was doing. That is what this book is doing. It also reminds me a lot of a sort of relatively lesser known but beloved book of mine called Oreo, by a Black Jewish author named Fran Ross, which is the same kind of fanciful, loving satire where ridiculous things happen and awful things also happen, but that's part of the same tone quality throughout the whole book. It reminds me of the work of Paul Beatty, and also to a lesser extent of who wrote the Nickel Boys? What's his name?
Colson Whitehead?
Colson Whitehead, yes.
I would say this is very different from Colson Whitehead because the primary thing that you will take out of any Colson Whitehead book is that life is unfair and we should all be depressed. And like, I love Colson Whitehead, one of my favorite authors, truly America's poet laureate of depression. But I feel like one of the reasons why you should read this book, and one of the things I liked about this book, is that this book is trying to make a really strong argument for staying alive and for the inherent value of being alive.
Yes. So it is closer to Paul Beatty than it is to Colson Whitehead. I think of them as similar writers. Paul Beatty's early work is incredibly depressing, but later on, as he gets more fanciful, he gets more pro-life. There's a word for that which isn't pro-life, but which sums up that sort of like enthusiasm for the world of the senses.
Versus Colson Whitehead, I don't think ever really does.
No, he does not. But if you want me to say why you should read this book without a whole bunch of reference that may or may not mean anything to you, it's
I will know that this is the one that if you like any of those books, but you would like to read something by a woman, then this is a good book to read.
Oh yeah, or if you want way more gay, which does not tend to arrive in those books, this is a good one for that as well. And also, if you just want to be, pounded with silliness, jokes, celebrations of food, culture, and music, very, very, very contemporary references also to food, culture, and music.
Right, which means that in 5-10 years, this will all seem very dated. Well, a lot of the culture will. The food will never seem dated because
that is part of the point of the book, and also part of the sense of place that the book is. That I think the most successful thing the book does is summoning that sense of place and time, and specificity is an integral part of that. This book is all the more heartbreaking because we can't go to restaurants in the year 2022. Undertale plays a big role in this book. You like
Yes.
Undertale? This author likes Undertale. Um,
Yes.
and yeah, no,
It's a
I
lot of fun.
it is a lot of
Even I,
fun.
who did not like it nearly as much as Isaac did, I have to agree that it is a lot of fun.
Yes. So perhaps you should take over the why you shouldn't read this book part.
The writing's not actually very good. Everybody's emotional state is overexplained, and it is overexplained while contradicted by their actions. Um, it's kind of ridiculous, and sometimes that is charming, and sometimes that's just annoying. It's way longer than it needs to be. Um, it's the characters aren't particularly well developed. Katrina is, but like neither Shizuka nor Lantran actually make much sense as people. Their motivations change from moment to moment. Um, there's the whole thing where like you have a possible war criminal and somebody who has convinced 6 vulnerable young people to sell their souls by playing on their insecurities, and there's no real consequences for that. Everyone's just like, well, you shouldn't do that again. She doesn't even like seem to feel particularly guilty about it, really. And there's a point at which, you know, there's a lot of points at which nobody's ever really that accountable for their actions. And that can be very frustrating if, you know, you just want any indication that perhaps people, you know, should think about the bad things that they've done, at least briefly.
All right. I agree with a total of one point that you just made, which is that the book is too long. The book is too long. It suffers from the same problems that all the other, that like 90% of the other books that we've done, maybe 99% of the books that we've done that were written within the last decade have, which is that it plods getting to the ending that you can see coming a mile away. It repeats itself and repeats itself. This book is a little bit less, I found that a little bit more bearable for this book just because you, the set pieces that I particularly enjoy in this book are peppered throughout. And so you sort of slog along and then stumble across something really nice. And then you slog along a little bit more. I disagree completely about the writing being bad. This writing is significantly better than the standard. It doesn't have any of the lazy, commonplaces about how, which tell you how people feel by, you know, what their bodies are doing that annoy the shit out of me in the rest of the books that we've done. The prose is functional. It's does not try to do anything that it can't do. I have no complaints about the writing style whatsoever.
Well, we can fight that one out.
Indeed. We don't end up talking about the writing style, but here's an additional content warning about self-harm. Oh, content warnings, though. There are a bunch of them. Rape. This is a book where rape happens to a named character who we care about on screen.
And I thought it handled that very well.
Yep. And sex work, survival sex work specifically, as I mentioned, the book does not pass judgment on survival sex work, but it does not shy away from how unpleasant it is or can be if you're forced into it. And let's see. Oh, if you're a vegan, I actually saw a review which was like, as a vegan, I could not, this book was a complete turnoff for me. And yeah.
I would argue that Lantran's parenting is very bad, and that's something which, that's another thing which you're just sort of supposed to shrug off. There's a lot of not very good parenting in this book, and some of it you're supposed to some of it the author understands is bad, and some of it the author thinks is not as big a deal. And it seems to really have to do with the gender of the parent.
There is a certain amount of that. Yes, I will concur.
This is definitely one of those books where like are there any good fathers in this book?
No. There are no good fathers in this book. The thing is that
there also aren't any good mothers, but the mothers are all forgivable / forgiven by the narrative.
There are no good adult men in this book.
That's true. There's no good adult men in this book.
Again, another one of my pet peeves. This book absolutely does it. I forgave it because I was so charmed.
See, I think you're forgiving this book a lot because you're so charmed.
Oh
But
yeah, no, I'm certain that as we continue to discuss it, that will we're gonna hash out all of those things. And I look forward to
but
doing
yes,
so.
so content warning for bad parenting, um, and like plenty of transphobia
Oh yeah,
and a fair amount of
racism.
racism.
Yeah, cartoonish.
Most of the cartoonish racism you're supposed to disapprove of. There is one moment fairly early on which is surprisingly racist, like on the part of the author, which annoyed it.
Oh,
It has
I look forward
it has
to.
two Chinese women speaking in their native language, and yet they're speaking broken English.
Oh yeah, no,
It
that didn't
annoyed
come.
the heck out of me.
That didn't come through in the audiobook.
But they are speaking like literal broken English.
Ugh.
Did the audiobook reader like make their English good?
No,
Like
she didn't.
grammatical?
So it's like they in the text itself, it renders it as like pigeon.
Yeah.
No, that's not very good, is it?
No, it's really not. And I think that perhaps that this is something where the audiobook and the textbook differed, and this ended up setting very different expectations for us going into the book.
Possibly. Shall we? I mean, shall we just get into it? It seems like we're already
Let's just get
getting
into it.
All right. Here comes the spoiler zone. Not that we haven't been there already. Oh, and abusive ducks. Also,
Yes.
you shouldn't feed ducks donuts.
I have to say, I don't know if this is a reason why you should read this book or why you shouldn't read this book. This book makes donuts sound way better than like 98% of donuts are.
Yeah, no, that is true.
Like you read this book and you go, "Oh, I could really go for a donut." And then you remember that most donuts aren't very good.
I mean, that's why a good donut shop is such a thing to be treasured. It's such a rare thing in this world.
Yes.
All right, on to the spoilers. Spoiler zone is where we go to talk about stuff we know and you don't. There's actually a bunch of other things that you didn't even mention any of the things that I thought you were going to mention about how this
Why
book
you
gets
shouldn't
wrong.
read the book?
This book absolutely is a glorious mess. I'm not going to argue that it
Right.
isn't. I think that does not mean that it's bad. But
The thing is, like, I think that, like I said, I think that this book has a lot of charm and a lot of heart. But the things about it that bothered me enough that I think I cannot call it good.
Indeed. Where to begin discussing this?
Why don't we start with the music stuff? Because you're the musician of the two of us. Obviously, you're the one who provides all the jingles. But you're also a cellist.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to arrange and perform a cello version of the opening theme from Undertale for this, which is going to be a pain in the ass. And it is not going to fight the universal nihilism plague. It is at best going to amuse you. But here it is. There it was. I did my best.
I like how you're recording all of this before you've even attempted it. You just know that that's what you're going to want to say after it.
Katrina is a prodigy. I was not. And I have not played cello seriously in over 20 years. But, I still have it and I will do my best.
Well over 20 years, because I met you over 20 years ago and you hadn't played cello seriously.
I had not played cello seriously at that point in 2 years when we met. So 22 years, perhaps. But none of this helps with us figuring. Oh yeah, the music stuff. What would you like to know about the music stuff?
I'm curious, like how you felt about it.
All of the music stuff is 100% spot on as far as I'm concerned. None of the references were wrong. This person clearly knows what they're talking about as far as both the sort of competition atmosphere to the extent that I was adjacent to such things.
She's a really interesting character, speaking of which.
Oh, no, I loved her. I actually...
I loved her, too. Like, I thought she was one of the more interesting characters in this, and it was the fact that, like, it came back to her several times.
Yeah, I was disappointed that they dropped her. She's going to be Chimon's next student.
Right, like, I feel like if there's a sequel, she will definitely be in, if this author writes another book in this universe, then like clearly she's going to be part of it.
Even though the indication is to be that Katrina is attracted to men, if not exclusively, then at least somewhat. There is I'm doing a crack ship between Katrina and
totally.
Yeah. Her name was Tamiko Grohl. 100%.
No, you're right. I don't even think it's that much of a crack ship. Like you've got your rivals to lovers arc right there.
Yeah, no, that seemed. I was not 100% sure the book wasn't going to go there, and I was vaguely disappointed that it didn't. But
me too.
But this book is again. I think actually something that I really liked about this book is that it lets Katrina not have a romantic interest or romantic relationship because she just needs to be a normal human being for a little while before that happens, if you see what I mean.
Right. Like, and I like that, I like that she has this sort of instant best friend, sister / I guess eventually stepsister sort of, with the AI girl.
Yeah. That was extremely charming.
I like that she was, mostly just because it's good that she's able to form a close relationship with somebody outside of Shizuka's household, given that everyone in Shizuka's household is, at the time, like, grooming her to be eternally damned.
Yes. 100%. Where were we?
We were talking about the music, and you said the music was spot on, the competition atmosphere.
All of the pieces that are referenced are correct, are real. You can listen to them. I think that the author did a really good job of explaining why that particular Bartok piece works as a piece of music. And I think I definitely went and listened to it a few times after I read the book. I understand why the author couldn't just say Undertale, even though the author said Undertale for a lot of other stuff. But I've seen Undertale be a bridge to, video game music can be good for like online music nerds. It happens a whole bunch. The whole YouTube like serious musician scene stuff, all perfectly well observed and good. I don't know what game Axiom is supposed to be. I think it might just be made up or sort of a combination.
I was going to ask you, because I sort of assumed that would be another reference you would be able to pick up that I couldn't.
Yeah, neither I nor anybody who I've talked to has been able to put their finger on it. It seems to be like somewhere in from the online music community that it's, that it comes out of. I think it's meant to be Minecraft-ish, but a much more interesting version of what Minecraft actually is. But no, I don't know the specific game that it's based on. It reminded me vaguely of a bunch of things, but it's not. There is no other game that is like as monumental a presence in the online video game music scene that Undertale is or was. Undertale transformed the online video game music scene completely. And yeah, no, I can't speak to the violin repair stuff because I've never gotten that deep into that scene. But the whole bit about how the the value of a violin being the way that the wood resonates, and sort of the idea that the more you play it, the more the molecules in the wood fall in line, and the more they resonate in a particular way, which is why old instruments are so valuable in some way. That's all real, and that all edges into the pseudo mystical among like real serious music people in much the same way that it does in this book. Honestly, I have no idea how much of that is actually scientifically supportable, but I'm certain that a lot,
but it is true to life of the
serious
of the
musicians do
community
believe that kind of thing. Yes. So it did a great job with the music. It did a great job with food. I think.
Oh yeah, no, the food stuff was great. I mean, I was definitely craving Hainan chicken.
Oh, the Hainan chicken stuff. So good.
The Hainan chicken scene was real good. And
Both
in general,
of them?
the food stuff was great. Except for, again, it made donuts sound honestly better than donuts are. But
Oh, when they're mystical alien donuts.
but these were mystical alien donuts that were missing heart.
Yes, they were.
That's not as good.
I mean, that sort of thing. I mean, the reason that I mentioned Daniel Pinkwater is that he did do this thing, and like this book is focused on this part of LA in the way that Daniel Pinkwater's book was focused on Chicago, or some of his books were focused on Chicago, and it was like it captures the wonder of being imminently with this beautiful, weird, wonderful food, and for food read any other thing that you might be passionate about, and then just hits that magic button because and you don't even have to turn it up very much. You can just turn it up a little bit.
Yeah. No, the food stuff is all great. Everything from individual meals to the fact that tangerines just keep showing up.
Yes.
Because of course they do, because there's the big swath of California where there's just more citrus. Like everybody's backyard just has more citrus than they know what to do with. I remember one time at John and Sushi's making lemon bars just because like they had all these lemons because they have a lemon tree because they're in the South Bay.
Right. The stuff with the ducks, I know we already mentioned that you shouldn't feed donuts to ducks, but like that seemed to be, I was like, has this person been inside my brain? Because I had a whole thing about, loving ducks and eating ducks back in college, as I'm sure you know.
I remember.
And that's
recall.
Basically the moral crux of this book. Like, this book is very much of the opinion that everybody does horrible things and the world is essentially a fallen place, and that everybody essentially both can get a second chance and might get a second chance with enough understanding and love, which is kind of the point of Undertale as well. Undertale just
it's okay. So let's shift into this because I think that would be a great moral message to read out of the book, and I do not think the book pulls it off. For me, one of the most frustrating parts in the book is when Shizuka and Lantran have this breakup because Shizuka has eternally damned 6 vulnerable teenagers and is in the process of doing that to a 7th. And Lantran doesn't pay attention when Shizuka's talking about music. And these are treated as equivalent relationship sins. And thus, because they're equivalent relationship sins, they can kind of be patched up with an equivalent level of, well, I guess we were just misunderstanding each other, and it's okay that you're going to lead this vulnerable trans homeless teenager into eternal damnation because because the teenager understands that that's what's happening and doesn't have any better options.
Yeah, and then later on, Lantran's holographic daughter runs away to Shizuka's house because Lantran is basically going to lobotomize her because Lantran thinks that's her right, and then that's the morally equivalent bit right there. Like that's the bit.
The thing is that's kind of the morally equivalent bit, except that Shizuka doesn't say, "Oh well, your daughter has conflicted feelings about this, so I'm just going to support you in doing this." she says, "No, that's wrong," in a way that nobody ever really does to Shizuka. I mean,
Lantron
yes,
did to Shizuka originally.
right, but then they get back together.
Yes, they do. Because
But like,
Lantron is a miserable, lost, broken person, and Shizuka is what makes her happy. So she
right,
puts
despite
her
the fact that
very
you really don't have
real
any
moral
reason...
considerations aside. And
Right. Except that this would be, I see, I'd be much more willing to believe that, like, that's there in the text and not just, like, what you want to read into it because you like the book. If, like, there was any real connection between the two of them other than, like, they think each other's eyes are pretty.
and and voice. Most of their
voice.
relationship takes place off screen, including, I mean, it's alluded that they actually have a physical relationship, but it's
Right.
alluded
And
to
that
very delicately.
And then they've had, like, a bunch of coffee dates.
Yeah.
But,
Most of that is left to the imagination of the reader. Yeah.
which is fine. It's just that I feel like the takeaway is that, is this really a relationship worth throwing away all of your moral principles for?
No, because neither of them are particularly principled. You
Right,
know,
and so I
it's
guess
like
there's just and the thing is that neither of them are particularly principled.
Lantron's outrage with. I mean, the point is not that Lantron forgives Shizuka for this outrage. The point is that Lantron's initial reaction to Shizuka's damnation of these souls is in some way performative outrage. I don't think that Lantron actually has a core moral response to this behavior on Shizuka's part. I think in part Lantron is looking for a way to extricate herself from the situation where she doesn't feel like she's in control. I think Lantron's anger is partially derived from the fact that she still thinks that Shizuka comes from a species of barbarians and therefore it is uncivilized behavior she objects to, not the moral content of the act.
That's fine. I still think that this is, again, something that would be great, but I'm not sure is actually there in the text. But I guess in that point, and to some degree, was your problem with Unconquerable Sun is, so why are we rooting for these people?
I'm rooting for Katrina for the most part.
I'm rooting for Katrina too, but like the thing is that Katrina is not actually the narrative core of the book. Like, Katrina is great, and if you wanted to pare this book down to mostly being about Katrina, it would be a much better book. But the book is really the book is focused primarily on Shizuka. And it's like she doesn't have a moral arc, but like, all the narrative tension is around, will Shizuka, win her freedom by eternally damning yet another vulnerable teenager, or will she find some like way to trick her way out of it and suffer no consequences, but manage not to harm this one most vulnerable teenager?
Yes. I would say that's entirely accurate. And again, like, I completely understand, Lantron and Shizuka are both like classic awful moms. And this book is an attempt to make you sympathize with them by focusing on the circumstances that made them that way.
I don't think so. I think that this book is an attempt to make you sympathize with classic awful moms by making them lesbians.
That's an interesting thought, but their being lesbians is so uncentral to their characters. It's like, right, they could even be good friends, honestly, and it wouldn't have changed much.
Except that I feel like they're allowed, like, that the narrative is letting them, is assuming that you will be sympathetic to these fairly awful people because they are gay and in love and have tragic and are like sad about their pasts.
Yeah, that is exactly what the book is doing. I think it's acknowledging to a certain extent that that you are more likely to stop and listen if they're gay.
Yeah, and so you stop and you listen and you go, okay, so these people have done horrible things and now they're going to lead a happy life together. I mean, good for them, I guess.
Yeah, maybe.
It's like the war great, the war criminal and the, person who's basically a, serial killer, except worse, of vulnerable teenagers, because not only do they, commit suicide, they, like, their souls are eternally damned. you know, they get to like have their happy running off together. And I mean, sure, I guess, like, sure, that happens in real life, but I'm just not convinced that this is it just, that would be fine if you're supposed to walk away from this book feeling cynical. That would work great in a Colson Whitehead book, but you're not supposed to walk away from this book feeling cynical. You're supposed to walk away from this book like feeling this like renewed joy in life and the world around you.
Yeah, I did, and I think a lot of it is has to do with ducks on hooks, but. You know, I think that I mean, I would say that the fact that we can have like this kind of disagreement about the moral core of this book is...
No, because Isaac, you and I could have a deep disagreement about the moral core of just about anything.
That's a solid point.
No, you unfortunately, with the two of us, you don't get to pull this is secretly actually deep because we're capable of arguing about it.
That's true. We can argue about absolutely anything. I think this book is layered, though. I think there's a lot going on.
There are definitely layers.
There are some very good narrative jokes.
The problem is that some of the layers are good, and some of the layers are really not.
I mean, again, this is all you know. This is all matter of taste. But yeah, no, I will absolutely admit the possibility that this book is actually evil.
I would argue that there are portions of this book which are morally bankrupt, and. You know, but no more evil than, like, the prevailing narrative that, you know, it's fine to be a war criminal if, like, you're a lesbian MILF.
Take Captain Marvel, for instance. A movie about how lesbians can be fascists, too. I mean, they both suffer, you know, and they both repent.
Sort of?
They do.
Sort of. Like, I'm not sure how much suffering they really do, and I'm really not even sure how much repentance they really
what
do.
Kind of
I mean,
suffering
they mostly
go. Want from them?
What I would like to see them do is like put any work whatsoever into like repentance. Repentance isn't, oh, I feel bad. Repentance is you're doing the work to try to undo some of the harm that you've done.
Yeah. I mean, they both do that. First of all, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, Lantron and Shizuko then dedicate their life to fighting the End Plague. So, to the extent that Lantron is a war criminal,
part of the problem is that the End Plague is so nebulous, and I did not find the End Plague to, like, particularly. The End Plague is just what, like, eventually everybody gets really depressed.
N stands for nihilism. This is
right, but like, the thing is that you can't fight nihilism. You can't like fight nihilism by like jetting around fighting it. I mean, I guess you can fight nihilism by like going and, you know, giving people really good food, and that would be great if that's what they were doing. But the thing is,
they're just giving
like,
people really good music, which you value less.
I value music quite a bit, actually. I just, I'm not convinced that going around playing the violin really prettily is actually going to, you know, do much in the face of nihilism. And the other thing is, neither is Lantran. They're both, she's like, well, the End Plague's still going to win in the end, but we might as well play the violin at it a bunch first. And that's totally going to make up for all the horrible things we've both done, both on us, you know, both like to others and to our own families.
Indeed, yeah. Now this, yeah, no, and it's like, so what they do for one thing is they both remove themselves from said families.
Right. I mean, which does include two of her children are quite young. And she just sort of leaves them in their grandmother's care and is like, bye forever, kids.
They're, you know, their aunt, their great aunt, but yes.
Their great aunt, yeah.
Yeah, no, but their great aunt is clearly a much better parent. So that's probably
honestly,
positive.
You know what? That is a good point. The willingness to just sort of go, I am not capable of being a good parent to you, so I will leave you in the care of a relative who is. You know, honestly, fine. I'm not going to hold that against Lantron. You're right. That's...
And similarly,
it would have been better to, you know, not try to, like, lobotomize your own daughter while neglecting your other children. But,
yes,
you know.
It would have been. But she didn't have that option because, she's
I
she's a
honestly
single
think that
mom
part of what's
who brought her entire family out of a war zone as a refugee, and that kind of made her slightly crazy and paranoid and single-minded, and that has resulted in a number of negative things.
right. I mean, there's also the fact that, like, I think part of what bothers me about, like, the way it is, the treatment of her daughter is that this is so much like the way that parents treat their disabled children. And the narrative seems to go, yeah, and that's not a good thing, but, like, it's not a terrible thing. It can pretty much just be fixed with some apologies and we'll all move on.
Some of us would have liked to have gotten an apology, honestly.
To attempt to basically say, well, my child is disabled, so we will remove any capability of my child to ever have agency. And, you get, like, a slap on the wrist, and then everyone just sort of collectively agrees not to make a big deal out of it. That's very realistic. But again, I think that the narrative expects us to empathize as much with Lantron as with her daughter, even if we're supposed to understand that Lantron's position is wrong.
And once this happens, this results in said disabled daughter leaving her home permanently.
Right. Permanently. And so that she can, again, move in with the vulnerable teenager who at the time is still being groomed for death and eternal damnation.
Some people don't have better options.
Right. And that's very true. Because, like, we see that with Katrina. She runs away from her abusive family and she ends up with, these racists, one of whom also rapes her.
Yes.
And then, she runs a third time to and she's like, well, yes, this person is going to kill me in, like, within a year, but that's still better than my last two options.
Yes.
And again, this would be great in a book where you're supposed to, like, feel deeply the brokenness of the world. But the thing is that this book can't decide whether or not it wants you to genuinely feel the pain of the world or wants you to, like, shrug it all off because, you can have, like, a funny chase scene where the, like, demon fireball is chasing, like, where the evil demon turns into a fireball and chases after the space.
It chases them into the donut Stargate. This is why I love this book. Because it is trying to do both of those things at the same time, which is how I feel the world is.
And I think that my problem with the book is that I did not walk away from this book going, the world is broken, but also hilarious and beautiful. I went away from this book feeling like the author did not want me to take some of these things very seriously. Some of these things clearly I was supposed to take seriously, like the rape and the, complicated trade-offs one must make in survival sex work. But a lot of the, like, child abuse, I didn't feel like I was actually supposed to take particularly seriously, again, because it was being committed by lesbians. And that, like, the lesbians kind of their get out of jail free card is that everything gets to be, like, gonzo and ridiculous and funny.
I mean, I cannot argue that your reading is invalid. Merely present mine as an alternative. I don't think that it undersells the seriousness of what Lantron is doing to, God, what's her name? The holographic child. I've forgotten. Shirley? It's Shirley. Sure. I don't think that she undersells that. I think that, like, Shirley becomes essentially catatonic with, the hurt and betrayal of it. Like, it works. I mean, I think that the effect on Shirley is textually worse than the effect of the rape on Katrina, because Katrina is like somewhat inured and so to that shit and expected it almost,
Part of the problem is that Shirley doesn't really get a lot of interiority in a text in like a book that's giving a lot of, part of it's a crowded book. Everybody gets some internal viewpoint stuff. Shirley really gets kind of shafted in terms of viewpoint time. Yeah. And I think that's part of why I feel like we're not supposed to take what Lantron does to her as seriously. Because for basically, for Marcus, is that the brother's name? You get to
Yes.
see the effect of racism and toxic masculinity on Marcus.
That is
Like
true.
you get to see it, and you get to really see the effects of everything on Katrina.
Yeah.
You don't, but the most of the emotions that you actually get to see the effects of around Shirley and Lantron's conflict are with Lantron. Like
Right.
it is still
So,
prioritizing the abusive parent of the disabled child. And like
yeah.
it's centering her feelings.
And so you could, and I'm sort of seeing what it is with the, as to loop in what is admittedly the very least interesting part of the book, which is the stuff with the violin shop. The and that's
I
all.
honestly found that kind of interesting. I found that kind of interesting, and the problem was that in the end, it didn't really go anywhere. Like in the end, she just sort of gets kind of seduced away by the demon, and oh well.
Yeah, which is another thing where it's like that. This could be, you know, the next book. But I thought that
Right.
I thought that the
Oh, that is the one good man in the book is her son.
no, I mean, if we're counting kids, then Lantron's male children, well, younger male kid is also
But
a.
I got the impression that her son was a teenager. And like,
Oh.
and the thing is that Lantron's teenage boy
Yeah,
becomes.
Well, I mean, he's
like
not.
Lantron's teenage boy goes on, a mass shooting rampage and kills 2 people.
Yeah. No, he's the school shooter.
Right, becomes a school shooter. Versus the violinist, the violin repairwoman's son, is.
Yeah, no, he's a decent boy. He's a good boy.
A decent boy. And I guess there's some implication that her grandfather wasn't terrible.
It was just her dad who was. I mean,
just her
the thing
dad.
is that entire family is complicit because their entire family has dealt with the
Right.
devil, which is why. And
Yes.
to me in this book, the devil symbolizes wealth. And if you're dealing with high grade music, you pretty much, or high grade musical instruments in that sense, you essentially have to deal with the devil, because that's.
I mean, I would
you know,
argue that he symbolizes like wealth and fame and power.
exactly. And being in the position that she is, if she wants a career, if she wants this family tradition to continue, she essentially has to keep dealing with the devil.
Right.
And
No, it's very interesting. The problem is that it didn't. It never really meshed appropriately with the rest of the story, and so it didn't feel like there was like an actual arc there.
yeah, I mean, the arc was her figuring out her. I mean, she figured out the secret of her family and then immediately forgot it because that was the demon. So
Right.
like that
Which,
and that
which
maybe.
is, it felt very. It ended up feeling very unsatisfying because it felt like it was building towards something, and then the something was a reveal solely for the reader, but that makes absolutely no long-term difference in the in that character.
Yeah. Again, I'll be interested to see if we do go back to this universe, if she gets revisited and that ends up continuing. But yeah, no, I think that that reading is a valid one. That because there's so much focus on the essentially the evil done by dads over the course of this book, that the moms essentially get a free ride in a spaceship, as you point out, for because they are justified because of what all the evil dads did to them. And this is all like how much it vibrates with your particular, or one's, not you specifically, but one's particular trauma and relationship with this stuff, I think will have an effect on how you receive that stuff. I was finding myself sympathizing with Shizuka a lot over the course of this book, rather than Katrina,
With Shizuka rather than Katrina?
Yeah. Just like I get how you feel and how you're going through this and why you've made these decisions and why you now want to change the way that you have interacted with the world, and how maybe you think that like being a good mentor for once might create at least some value in comparison with the rest of the stuff that you've done. And but I think also like, yeah, I want if we do end up going back to this world, I want to see like one of those teenagers that is going to damn themselves to hell because of ambition. I want to see them work their way out of it. I want to see what's her face.
Right. Yes. The one who gets
Yeah.
passed over near the beginning.
Yeah. I want to see her do her revolution, and see what that looks like.
Yeah.
Can I list a few just random things that I liked about the book before we? I mean,
Sure.
I will then say various things about the book that annoyed me, in addition to all of the ones that we've already gone through.
And I may have some other things to list that I liked about the book. So as well.
Yes.
So
Um. So yeah, no, I loved all the food porn, the bath porn, the music porn. All that stuff's great. My favorite joke in the book is that the one good white woman is the wise maid, essentially, the mammy.
yes.
That
Yes.
and she's the whitest possible woman to make sure you get the joke.
She's from, like, Sweden or
Astrid from
something.
Sweden.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
I
No, that
loved
was great.
that. That was hilarious. And she
That was
never gets a
hilarious.
motivation or a backstory because
Nope.
it's her job in the narrative to be the mammy, and that's fine.
Right. No, that was hilarious. Though, and the unfortunate thing is that you then get, of course, this, you get this like sort of wise, sweet aunt figure who is, again, complicit in the grooming of vulnerable
Well,
children.
there
towards
you
death
go.
and eternal damnation.
That's another part of that. That figure is complicit in maintaining the evil status quo that she's a part of.
Right. But no. You're right that like having the sort of, the wise mammy figure be Astrid from Sweden is hilarious.
And I do apologize for using that term, but you know what I'm trying to say.
This is clearly
It's
a
clearly
satire on that particular concept.
Yes. The let's see here.
I really also, speaking of Astrid, the running joke with the tangerines. Honestly, I found it funny every time.
The
Just,
tangerines
like,
are. Oh yes.
Here's
Here's some more tangerines. They're still in season.
Right, like there's always more fruit than they know what to do with, because it's like living next to somebody who's growing zucchini, except tastier.
I agree with you that Katrina is by far the best realized character. I thought that basically, I found everything about like her hypervigilance and how that helps and hurts her to be spot on.
Yeah.
One thing that I think this book does a tremendous service to is that it lays out step by step how you fucking get out. Like,
yeah, that's a good point.
It repeats and repeats what you put in your escape bag, what you have to be prepared to contend with, like who you might be able to trust, who you shouldn't trust, that kind of stuff.
Right.
You may or may not find a demonic rich benefactor at the end of that process.
Yeah,
but,
and it's funny because like the handling of everyone else's PTSD is really bad. Like Lantrad, it does not, to me, come across as being particularly like she didn't seem so much traumatized as self-absorbed. But Katrina's PTSD was, I thought, very well depicted.
I don't know. I find the business of obsessively playing a video game with no win condition to deal with your trauma was very
That's fair.
Yeah,
Maybe I
I've
just
done
couldn't
that.
get over how like maybe I just can't get over how like boring old arcade games are. But
yeah.
But no, but like it was interesting because to some degree, like Katrina is kind of a character from a slightly different book than everybody else.
Well, I mean, I think part of that is that if we're seeing these people through Katrina's eyes, they're all from such completely different worlds than she is. They might as well be aliens.
But the thing is that we're not seeing everything through Katrina's eyes, because the book, and one thing I actually enjoy that the book does is that it will cheerfully switch between perspectives from paragraph to paragraph, which is a thing that books used to do, and at some point they stopped doing them. And I like when authors are willing to just go, no, you can always see, you can see from into whoever's head is most convenient for this paragraph.
I liked the way that the book made an explicit connection between Asian fetishes and chasers.
Yeah, no, that was, again, a lot of the way that, a lot of the stuff around Katrina was really well handled. I thought, I do also want to give points to the book for pointing out that sometimes your queer found family who will take you in are actually worse.
Oh, I loved that.
Just as bad or worse. Like,
that part again felt like so true to life.
No, that entire that household and all of its awfulness just seemed like an extremely well depicted, realistic, And it's a good point. Often first of all, people who are like, oh yes, of course, come stay with me anytime. Some people mean that, and some people really don't. And sometimes you don't know until you turn up on their doorstep, which is which.
Oh, I'll tell you actually. What character beat made me feel like I actually knew Lantron more than anything else? The Olive Garden scene. That felt real to me. Lantron's delight at something so civilized. That felt very correct to me. You still there? Shocked into silence by Olive Garden.
Yeah, I'm still there. I'm just
okay.
The Olive Garden thing to me felt a little bit like an extended riff on like the Tumblr jokes about Olive Garden.
Oh no, I felt like that was it brought that up, undercut it immediately, and then was definitely, I thought, using that to make a big point about how like stability and politeness and a world that made sense was the only thing that Lantron wanted. And
that's fair. I'm willing to give you that. I'm willing to acknowledge that my Italian family's relationship with Olive Garden is such that.
Yes. Well, you don't like Lantron. That's fine. That's entirely.
The thing is, like, despite this, I like Lantron. I just don't like the book
Right.
I don't like the way that the book handles Lantron, because I still come away from this being like I still like this person, even though and I don't feel like she's given me enough to like. So we're starting to run out of time. Is there anything about the book that you disliked?
Yes, I would say. Oh, can I say one more thing?
Sure.
The demon's most wizardy thing that he does is just absolutely fucking over Katrina just by outing her as trans in an emotionally positive way, which again I thought that was really well observed, a good wizard beat. But that will be the final positive thing I say about the book. All right, onto the complaining zone because we're running out of time. Complaining zone. Complaining zone. Zone. Things that I didn't like about this book, besides the fact that it is definitely too long. They could have cut out a whole bunch of the middle, particularly. It has sort of magical talent running through the blood stuff with the violin family, which it did not really handle properly, because I think that it was all in on the sort of which is again sort of the book's major problem, which is that it's all in on the sensual, and the joy of it, and then doesn't entirely interrogate the ideas behind it, like the hands of that family, like what the hell does that mean, and the whole you can't do it because you're a girl thing. Maybe that's true in some corners of the world still, but it felt a bit outdated compared to the concerns of the rest of it. I didn't like that they dropped the plot line with the other student, as I mentioned. There's a reference to a parakeet whistling the magic flute. That's a cockatiel. I've seen that video. It's not a parakeet, it's a cockatiel. Once again, bird errors. I will hold all books up for bird errors. It's the cockatiels that do that.
It is. I remember reading that, and that was one of the reasons why I thought that this book would irritate you, in fact. Right. Because at one point you complained to me about like sticking gratuitous references in books, and now I realize that it's just you don't like it when the gratuitous references aren't pandering to you.
Honestly,
when they pander.
I would have felt that this book, if this book was partially about the changing music industry and even how that's affecting classical music right now, and if you hadn't mentioned Undertale as part of that, it would have felt weird, particularly since you had a bunch of other real life,
that's fair.
Stuff in there. It's the fact that Shizuka has 6 human souls and just need a 7th that's a little bit over the top. If you've played Undertale, you know what I mean. Um,
I did not play enough of Undertale to know what you mean, because Undertale is actually kind of hard and takes a lot of time, and I was busy getting a doctorate when it came out.
yes, nobody should ever feel that they have to play Undertale. I just want to make that very clear in this podcast right now. Um, it also weighs a little bit heavily on the whole God-given talent makes you a special person thing. I mean, it does a fair amount of undercutting that in some ways, but I think that
Sort of.
it buys.
The reason that Katrina is redeemable is because, she has God-given talent. And it doesn't make a particularly convincing case that another similarly homeless trans youth of color on the street necessarily deserves to also be swooped in and rescued.
Yeah, no, this book has the problem with stuff that focuses on the specialist and the best of, the world around you. And it's very important that the structures that keep the good restaurant going, regardless of what kind of horrible, weird, fucked up family dynamics are, behind the scenes of the restaurant. That is kind of the pervasive problem with the book as a whole, that it is willing to forgive so much if you can get just the right violin tone or just the right donut. It is even willing to sell its own soul, I would say. And, how you feel about that, again, is on you. But just to be really... It doesn't do enough or really much of anything to fight the dominant narrative that some people are just gifted with supernatural talent, which is, again, something that is just taken as a given within these sort of classical music circles in the real world. But on the other hand, I think that it does a very good job of getting into how shit life is, So it's like...
Yes, and the way that the book, and I mean, the way that the book basically makes a case for continuing with life despite its atrocities, and that case is mostly hanging out with people by, nice ponds, eating delicious food, and making friends. That part I definitely did really like about the book, and that is why, despite my, spending most of this hour being very negative towards the book, I did not actually walk away from it hating it. I am unable to hate this book despite all of my problems with it.
Yes, and
I would read something else by this author because I want to see if this if she can do other things which still have this joy in life, but are less messy or messy in more interesting ways or whatever.
Yes, and I'm going to read other books by this author as well, and I'm also going to read. I was prompted by reading this book to go back and see what old Mr. Pinkwater was doing, because
what is old Mr. Pinkwater doing?
He's still writing books. He's 80 years old and he is still writing books. And since the most famous, his trademark was that he ate everything and was extremely fat his whole life, I am really gratified to see that he has managed to 80 and is still writing books. And a few of the recent books, based on their titles, are about girls, which is also something he was never particularly good at.
Well, that's very new and exciting.
Yep.
I will note another issue I have with this book is basically everybody is thin and pretty.
Oh yeah, that is
which is another sort of, if these people weren't thin and pretty, would we still be expected to forgive them their sins and find their lives as valuable as the narrative does?
I'm not sure if Katrina is thin and pretty, honestly.
I mean, I get the impression that she's at least thin and that she's at least fairly pretty. She's supposed to be pretty. She's supposed to be obviously a trans girl, and honestly, good on the narrative for making her, pretty despite, being obviously a trans girl.
One of the moments of her feeling, jarred when she's in front of people is feeling her belly pressing against her dress.
But she's also getting to wear this slinky dress from the kind of store that does not stock plus sizes.
This is true, and the characters spend all of their time eating rich, delicious food. So maybe that's another maybe less supportable element of magical realism, is that you can do that and not get fat. Maybe if you make a deal with the devil, you can. But yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. This is a segue to where we attempt to sum up everything that we've talked about. And instantly, why does Zelda get called by its own name? And Undertale isn't. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
If you have not read the book yet, and having listened to this podcast makes you wonder if you should read the book, you might as well give it a try. I think you may be as like completely won over as Isaac, or you may just be as sort of reluctantly, crankily charmed as me. But there is, in fact, a lot in this book to enjoy.
Yes, and I think this is entirely possibly a book that I might have loved less had I not been delirious with fatigue. We were recording this on December the 19th, and I read it over the last 65-hour work week in my ears as I was delivering all of your packages and your parcels. So, you know, I'm maybe once I come to my senses, if I had been in my right mind, I would have been less vulnerable to its charms.
You know what? But honestly, shout out to Raika Aoki for making, being a postal worker during the Christmas rush slightly less miserable.
Yes, thank you so much, Rika. I appreciate it.
You know what? If ever there's a group of people who could use like a list of reasons to stay alive and take joy in life, it's postal workers in the run up to Christmas. So next week, I believe we are doing a short fiction. Next episode, we're doing a short fiction roundup by popular demand. By our one. Yes,
by our biggest fan and occasional guest presenter.
By Wizards vs. Lesbians fan / guest contributor PH Lee has urged us to do a short fiction roundup. So I have chosen 3 Wizards vs. Lesbians ish short stories. One recommended by Leora, one recommended by Lee, and one recommended by me. So I will provide you, Isaac, with links or other ways of reading them.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And that will be next time. And until next time, stay alive, everyone.
And eat some good food.
Absolutely.